We are going to be getting started here. So I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that our chocolate festival is coming up. Chapters of Chocolate, February 8th. We have a demo in the atrium with Amy, the owner of Amy Bakery. We are so excited about that. Anybody can really bake anything for this event, chocolate themed. There's judges and prizes, and it's just an all-around good time for the community. And there's a dog parade. Who doesn't love that? So if you saw our sparsely decorated atrium at the moment, that is because we are having some renovations done this weekend, starting tonight. We are very excited. So you'll have to check back next week and see what we've had done here. But without further ado, we will get to the program. My name is Amy Wolf. I am the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you so much for being here as well. The Roaring Twenties. Let's go back in time a bit to bootlegging, the Prohibition, speakeasies, flappers, rail travel, the romanticized rail travel with Bing Crosby at the piano and everybody in white gloves. I think I might be doing a disservice. So I will say that we have two very talented local authors here to talk to you a bit more in depth, and they have an amazing slideshow. We have author Dorothy Skelley and author Sharon Anderson here to talk about the Roaring Twenties, a major turning point for Cape Cod. Here.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. We thought there was going to be maybe 10 people. So we're thrilled. And we hope that you'll sit back and relax and just have a little bit of fun with us. And I just want, we didn't know there'd be so many people, so we don't have so much water, but there are cookies that are from 1920s recipes that Sharon's daughter Tina made, that you are welcome to enjoy. And we're going to pass around some candy that actually was not just popular, but started in the 1920s, and they're unbelievably still making them today. So we want you to enjoy that as well. What else can I tell you? We would love for people to share any stories that perhaps clearly there are no Dapper Dans or flappers in here. But if you have stories to share that have been passed down through your family, we'd love to hear them. So
now that was our research, extensive research done on this. Can they hear me?
No.
Right, I'll put it down because I have a mic. Have a cheat sheet. So you'll know. Okay, I hope this is better. Okay. I don't know, where was I going with that?
well, you said you've done extensive.
Oh, we did extensive research on this, and I just want you to know that Dorothy put this whole thing together. She's remarkable, and we just finished it yesterday afternoon. So that was kind of a dress rehearsal. But anyhow, first slide, are we on? Okay. I don't know if any of you know, but I did eventually, a long time ago, write the airport book. You can see it over here. And that was the catalyst that prompted me to do a podcast. And this is my podcast. I don't know if you can see it.
There are cards of
Cards are over there, tells you all about the podcast. I might. Oh, no, sorry about that.
better.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is, there are cards over there. This is the podcast. And on the podcast, I think I have 78 episodes. And it's all about rum runners and prohibition and the 1920s. And it's called Cape Cod 1929. It also prompted me to write a new book, my new novel. It's all about oyster harvest. Anybody know where that is? Okay. Also extensive research, and I'm still researching it. So anyhow,
And she'll be back for a book launch soon, probably in June.
Yeah, we're looking at dates. We would like the people of Oyster Harbors to be back from their other homes. So-
there are other locations.
Okay, you ready?
So what do we find? Okay, there. I told you they let me have cheat sheet. I don't know, how many of you have had cataracts done? Okay, I'm due next month. So I can't see. Okay. We covered the airport book.
Oh, well, no, you haven't really talked about it yet.
I haven't.
Well, how the history of the Cape Cod Airport was based on the log that the manager, Alston Brewster Sherman, kept, and how that inspired you.
Why don't I have that?
You have it right here, honey.
It's on the back.
No, you have it right here.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy, you know, she's wonderful, and I probably wouldn't have done this without her. Okay, so.
And I clearly wouldn't have done this without her.
Okay, the history, yeah. The airport book is an actual, not sifted through my brain, history of the airport from a log that Alton Sherman kept day by day, or no, week by week, I think he did. And so it goes from 1928 to 1948. And Amelia Earhart was on the board of directors. I don't know if anybody knew that here. She was also a stockholder. So it did provide a lot of information about what was going on the Cape at that time. And it was also the beginning of our tourism, because the airport and the flight airplanes were able to bring people in from far away. I think that's enough. Okay. My new novel, Dorothy, there's the cover. It's set in Oyster Harvest in 1929. And it's about a young debutante who yearns to be a journalist. And she also wants to be a pilot. Now, at that time, you know, you just, especially, she came from money. She came from wealth. And her set didn't do things like that. So she did become a feature editor on the Barnstable Patriot. This is all in my book. It's historical fiction. Fiction. But there's also a dead body. I forgot to tell you about that. There's always a dead body in my book. Okay, but it was the beginning of the Oyster Harvest, and do we have that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Edward Channing built one of the first homes here on Oyster Island. Oyster Harvest, well, it wasn't Oyster Harvest, then it was Grand. He actually he built it. It was a hunting lodge. So Richard and Helen Winfield, they also owned the farm that eventually became the Cape Cod Airfield. Zenas Crocker, and you'll hear his name frequently, or I ran into it a lot. He was a World War I biplane pilot whose family dates back here. He's been around for a while. He was also, he lived on Oyster Harvest. Alex DuPont. Now, DuPont, they owned almost the whole top part of the island at this time. Paul Mellon raised horses. And, you know, they also held, we got that fox hunts and polo matches. And if you can see the little white part underneath the island, that's where the polo field was. Okay, and Forrest, William Danforth, and he plays a part in my book. He was a stockbroker from Boston, and he was a polo player. And, yeah, he bought the Cape Cod airfield. Now, there's a difference between the airport and the airfield. Forrest Norris, I love that name. He was an entrepreneur, and he saw the possibilities of Oyster Harbor, and he started to develop it. I'm done with that, Chief. Your turn.
Okay, well, so you saw how adorable and we were in these outfits, but they're a little bit hot, so.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so before we travel down the coast here, let's talk about what the country was like in the 1920s. It was definitely a period of dramatic social, economic, moral, and political change. It was a shifting political climate. There were a lot of progressive politicians who favored rights for workers, migrants, minorities, and women. Labor unions were thriving, and there was also racial tension and consciousness that was brewing. And then, of course, the 1919 Volstead Act for Prohibition, which went into effect in January 1920. Interesting thing about that, we'll get to. So this is a period where November 11th in 1918, the armistice was signed, ending World War I. And then right around the corner came that darn pandemic, which we're familiar with, not the one we went through, but so by this time, by 1920, people they wanted to put all this misery behind them, and they were ready to party down. So also during this period, there were major advances in industry, incredible economic prosperity. People suddenly had some more leisure time. There's a lot of social and cultural changes going on. Suddenly the rise of the entertainment industry was phenomenal in the 20s. And it also, frankly, was a period of excess. So here's some interesting numbers about the average cost of living in 1925. So people worked an average of 50-ish hours, and they earned on average about $3,200. So, but when you look at like a new home costs, $6,000 plus, which if you do the math is about, twice the annual income. Well, and the average income was 50, so today the average income across the country, certainly not here, is about 54,000. So if you double that, I don't know where you can find a house for $216,000. So it was a good time to buy a house back then. Another interesting one is the cost of a wedding. Was about $400. I mean, I don't even know if that'll buy you one dinner. Okay. Also, the radio, interestingly enough, in the early 1920s, it cost over $200, that's a lot of money. So that's why but further on, it was like $50 to $75. So that's why you see people, families, neighbors, and friends gathering around the radio because not everyone could afford them. So there was a changing standard of living for the masses. For the first time, there were more Americans living in the city than on the farm, and they had more disposable income. And this was a period where credit first started becoming available to, the average person. So there was mobility. We had all these time-saving devices. Entertainment was a big deal. And I think in the previous slide, it said that the average cost of a car was $525. And by 1935, half of the households in America had a car, which I think is amazing. Sharon, tell us about that car.
Yeah, that was my dad's. It was a 1934 Packard. And I don't know where he got it. I never saw it because I wasn't born then. but I think that's the car he courted my mother with.
So from Flappers to Dapper Dan, obviously the fashion was unbelievable. For the first time, hemlines were going up and up. And being seen, in sharp clothes was a must. So again, we said that, the Volstead Act went into effect in 1920. So but the question really was the party over or was it just beginning?
Yeah.
So if you, I love this picture, it really kind of fueled the party. So here we have some of the big stars of in Hollywood. So let's do a little quiz here. There we go. Okay, anybody know who this is? We're gonna go over here now.
Wow, you guys are good.
American Sweetheart, you can hear me?
There you go.
Yep. Oh, no, actually, this one, sorry, that is Mary Pickford. And then Clairvaux, yep. And this handsome fellow. Douglas Fairbanks, who was married to Mary Pickford.
And of course, everybody knows who the clown is.
Yep. And this lady?
Doris Swanson.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Now Gloria was a frequent visitor to Cape Cod. I'll leave it at that.
You know what? You know how we can tell? Because the airport.
Oh,
Every pilot that came in and out of the airport had to sign in. That's a federal law. And so, the pilots were asked you had to give their destination, where they came from, their flight, their airplane, whatever it was. But they also had to say why, what the purpose of the flight. And her name came up quite
so this was, in 1927, the jazz thing was first talking, and 25 cents would buy you a double feature and a live show. So everybody was kicking up their heels. You had the Harlem Renaissance, which was amazing. It was the Jazz Age. You had latest dance craze was the Charleston, but there was also the shimmy. What are the other ones?
Foxtrot.
The foxtrot
And the tango.
And the tango, yeah. And once in a while, people might read a book if they had nothing else to do, right? And this was also considered the golden age of the detective novel.
These are some of the books that came out of that time, and they're very popular. I think, you can tell. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
So we went from boom to bust. So there was an incredible economic boom between 1924 and 1929. The economy actually doubled in size. There was an enormous expansion of credit, which, some economists will say that was the reason for the bust. But and then of course the crash in 1929. So it's interesting to see that we went from the world's highest standard of living, and then just days before the crash, we were talking about how, bye, the market is invincible. And then, the more serious time of the depression and the bread lines and people out of work. But we're just gonna look on fun stuff. So meanwhile, over the bridge, take it away.
My turn. Yeah, now the Wampanoags have been here for a very long time. Long before the colonizers came. But they also taught the settlers how to live. And one of the stories I read a long time ago told how the indigenous people taught the pilgrims to, when they planted their corn, to plant a fish right on top of the cornstalk, or when, the seed when they started it, so that it would nourish the plant and they would get healthy corn. Now, the The English also insisted that the Wampanoags convert to Christianity, and they forbid them to speak any other language other than English. Now, I have a girlfriend who is part of the Wampanoag tribe, and she's wonderful. And right now, her name is Linda, and she is teaching the children their native language, and she's writing books for them. And I'm so proud of her. Thank you. Okay, next sheet. Not everyone came on the Mayflower. The industrial expansion created a need for skilled workers. Now, the Urban Dictionary describes a washershore. How many of you here are washershores? Okay, how many of you here are true Cape Codders? Oh, look at that. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Does anyone know how many generations it takes not to be considered a washershore? How many generations? 2, 3, 4? I don't know the answer. That's why. Research.
Some say 5, some say, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. Actually, I'm not a washershore. I'm a drive-ashore. I drove over the bridge. Yeah, the early 20th century saw industrial expansion in Massachusetts, which created a need, the mills started being built. And so it created a need for thousands of skilled workers. And it led to a diverse population with immigrants and countries such as France, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Germany, and the Slavic countries, joining the Scots and the Irish who had arrived earlier. Now, they probably came through Ellis Island. Now, with their arrival on Cape Cod over 200 years ago, early Cape Verdeans were instrumental in building Cape Cod's economy through agriculture and whaling. Yeah, they also taught us how to build cranberry bogs, which was a very famous, it was a viable farming. Thank you. I lost a word. Okay, are we on the next slide? Okay. Our most famous washershores, who are they? How'd you guess? Now, Joseph Kennedy, and I found this information somewhere, was put up for membership in the exclusive Cohasset Country Club. He was blackballed, apparently for being an Irish Catholic. Now, they did that then. They would not be allowed to do it today. In 1926, Joseph Kennedy rented the Malcolm Cottage in Hyannisport after being rebuffed. He bought it in 1928 and doubled its size. And one thing I found out is he put a complete movie theater in the basement of that home.
Perhaps he had some movie stars visit there.
Yeah, but he was welcomed into the Hyannisport Club, which was a golf club managed by an Irish Catholic, where he was welcomed as a member. So, but he built his own legacy. Now, local economy. Whaling and salt works industry, yeah, they were pretty much on the way out. Cranberry farms were still a vital source of income. The children were often excused from school to harvest the logs. And the public service, you have to think about this. Not everyone on the Cape had electricity. And if they did, it wasn't gee, this sounds like now, it wasn't always, irregular, it wasn't always regular, you know? At that time, it became very irregular. It was an inadequate. Oh, does it sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah, we do lose power occasionally, don't we? And also, the resort industry was beginning to, this is our tourism, was beginning to show signs of prosperity. Promise, thank you. Oh, God, I need my glasses. Ah. Okay, are we on the next slide? Thank you. Now, the year-round population at that time on the Cape was 30,000 people. Now, you have to divide that in two because half of those were kids. Okay, so now we're down to 15,000 people. That's not many. Now, the whaling industry was the mainstay until the late 19th century, and then they didn't, I don't know whether they fished the whales out or they depleted the whale population.
Well, they started to be able to get oil from the ground in different areas.
Oh, see, thank
Which
you.
was a
That
lot
was,
cheaper, yeah.
yeah, okay, so that made sense. Now, the people were eating codfish 3 times a day. I love codfish, but oh my. And the lure of rum running was difficult to resist. Now, think about that. You know, all of a sudden, they have an opportunity to get some money for the household. Okay, where am I?
You're right, where you should be.
Where I should be, thank God. I told you this is a dress rehearsal, guys. Okay, in 1919, Charles Ailing, a Centerville businessman, launched a plan that would change the lives of thousands on Cape Cod, the creation of a community hospital. And now Charles Ailing also was responsible for the Cape Cod, the Hyannis Airport. He's very prominent in that book. Ailing, along with 7 other members of the Hyannis Board of Trade, raised $35,000 to purchase the summer residence of Dr. E.F. Gleason on Hyannis Inner Harbor, and you can see the little picture up there. Okay, overlooking Lewis Bay, the 3-story wooden frame building opened for public viewing on Saturday, October 20th, 1920. Get this, with 14 beds, 2 cribs, and nurses' quarters on the 3rd floor. The Cape Cod Hospital was born. 14 beds, that's not even 1 floor at the hospital that we have here now. Okay, there is a story about that. Next slide.
Well, do you want to tell a story about what inspired him to
Oh, that's kind of
build a hospital?
Yeah, Charles Ailing, the reason he started the hospital is he was going into Boston on the train. And on the train with him was a nurse and a man all wrapped up in bandages on his hands. And so they were going, he asked, you know, what's wrong and so forth. And they were on their way to Boston because he needed hospital care. So come to find out, it was a seaman, a sailor, and he had been on a ship that had sunk, and he was holding on to the mast to save himself. But in the process, his hands got frozen to the mast. Yeah, I told you it was not a nice story. But anyhow, so that's why Charles started a hospital. He said, we really need a hospital here on the Cape. So. Am I on that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so Charles, he also, I already mentioned this, but he formed the Hyannis Airport Corporation. And his son Robertson was the first airport manager who died tragically in a boating accident at 22. He was only a manager for like a year and a half. Attorney George E. Adams from Quincy, does that sound familiar? He was on the board. Amelia Earhart was a stockbroker, a stockholder and a member of the board. And Sherman did it all. He was the manager. He took over after the 2 years after Robertson died. And he did it all. He was an officer in the Naval Reserves. He was a competitive flyer. He won quite a few trophies. He was a flight instructor, and he was the airport manager. It wasn't unusual for him to have a charter flight, bring the people, land the plane, get off the plane, unload their luggage, put it into his own car, and drive them home.
Sharon, you have a question?
Is that the airport that's in Marston's Mill?
No.
No.
It's the one that road.
Yes.
The airport in Marston's Mills is the Cape Cod Airfield. Yeah. Okay. Oh. Side story. The hospital, they had to paint a big red cross on the roof so that the planes would not fly over and buzz and wake up the people that were trying to get well, the patients. So they had, they painted that red cross on the roof. Okay, my turn
Yeah.
still?
Yep. So this
Okay.
is the Cape Cod Airfield.
Oh, okay, yeah, there you are, hon, yeah. The water was piped into company streets, electric lights, a telephone system, a wireless system, and equipment to listen to messages from the Eiffel Tower and Tufts College band concerts. The listening equipment could also pick up storm warnings along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Now that was pretty awesome. But when you think of it, we're back in 1922, and this, the base, Camp Perkins, had all of this already in place.
Where was it?
They-
Marston's Mill.
Where the airfield. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. It was also founded by Zenas Crocker. I told you his name would come in again and again. Wilfred Baruch opened the Chatham Airport in 1935. And then Provincetown Municipal Airport didn't open until 1940. And then Falmouth Air Park, which is totally different, in the 1950s. Anyone know what an air park is? Yeah, I'm getting people shaking. That's right, they're homes that are built around a runway. And they had their own, they didn't have cars in the garage, well, maybe they did, but they also had airports, airplanes. Oh, your turn.
So we'll let you off the hook for a few minutes. So let's talk about how we became a vacation destination and how people actually got here. And back in the 1700s to the mid 1800s, the only way you could get here was either a private coach, your own private coach, or a stagecoach, or packet. And I believe it took about 8 hours for a packet to go from Chatham to Boston. The stagecoach, I believe, took, I think it took 7 days. Yeah, that's why you had all these taverns and inns along the way where people would, could stop. But then the railroad came to Sandwich in 1843. And bit by bit, the tracks were laid all the way down Provincetown, and by 1873, they were complete. Well, suddenly this meant that, it was actually accessible. I mean, this is a pretty rural area. And so people started flocking to the Cape, and a lot of big, fancy luxury hotels. Again, we're talking about, people with some spending money to be able to do this. But the Hotel Belmont, in Harwich, opened around that time, the late 1800s. Chatham Bars Inn around 1914, I think. And I don't know, famous, like the Requested Inn. I'm sorry? Requested, yes. So you see, I don't really go to these swanky hotels. And there were many more, up and down the whole coast. But again, this was for a very narrow population. Well, suddenly the automobile comes around 1925 was when it was sort of common, and it was about $500. So there were a lot more people who could afford that. And then, of course, in 1928, you have the airport, so the rich and famous could come in and out quickly. So again, I think Sharon mentioned this, actually in 1920, the population was about 26,670. And if you, again, figure that half of those were, at least half were children. So the Cape was roughly the size in population the size of Hyannis today. And we had all this company. And it really did infuse the economy.
I have a question
Yes.
on that one.
Yeah.
So we know the bridges were built in the 30s.
Well, they were drawbridges.
Oh, okay.
In like, I think about 1914, 1915, those two drawbridges.
Right. So did the train, when was the Bourne Railroad Bridge built?
That was about the same time. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they were left off, like the train, for instance.
Right.
They were left off, obviously, on the other side, and then get transported over?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, actually,
I didn't hear all the
no,
questions.
she was asking about the railroad bridges and about getting on. I don't think they necessarily got off in Wareham because it went, it opened in 1843 in Sandwich, so it could go that far.
I didn't know how they got paid with the train up.
Yes, the canal had been built, and it was, it was everything was rebuilt by 1935 because the canal was not deep enough.
Right.
And so there were a lot of, ships that got stuck. And the bridges, the Bourne and the Sagamore they were drawbridges before. And so all of that took place around 1935.
Oh, yes. Point, they knew, I'm sorry, they knew they knew, how many cars exactly came because there were only 10 cars allowed on each trip for the drawbridge, whatever it was. Okay, that's it. Sorry.
No, sorry. So there were lots of fancy places where you could eat, and I think probably, one of the preeminent places was the East Bay Lodge in Monterville. And it's a picture of the dining room. But also during this time, because more people were coming, not everybody was going to be staying at a fancy hotel or eating in a fancy restaurant there. So we started seeing some more modest restaurants. The Wayside Inn in Chatham was known for chicken and steak dinners for $1. There was the Old Mill Tavern in West Yarmouth that opened in 1924. And unfortunately, so this is the sad part is that, they didn't serve any alcohol. So they didn't last. And then you had the Mayflower Cafe in Hyannis. And certainly there's others, these are just examples. And at the Mayflower, you could get the works for $2. So you could get, how many, I don't know how many courses we have. We have about 5 courses that you can get for $2. And it was a popular spot for pilots and their visitors to come to the airport. And you see a lot of coffee cups that went in and out of that restaurant, and they weren't all necessarily filled with coffee. And it is rumored that the third drink was free, which I think is a pretty good deal.
What would be that's on me? Yeah, what does it say?
It's certainly not.
384 to 386.
Yeah, 384 to 86.
It's right at the base of Main Street. Where?
It's on the right. Oh, on the menu.
So this was really, when we were doing our research, this was really very interesting to me because across the country, tea rooms became very popular. And at that time, a woman could not go into very many places unaccompanied without a man. And so they, and women, especially like women who had been widowed from World War One, wasn't any like, there were very few respectable occupations for a woman. But these tea rooms were primarily women owned, and it was mostly like middle-class women, that sometimes it would be just a room in their house. They would prepare light meals in their kitchen, and they were doing that anyway, you know, they were cooking. And the menus were full of salads, figure sandwiches, and desserts. And especially in the city, there were very popular spots for working women and women socializing on their own. And many started even before the 20s. So the tea rooms actually became a hotbed for women seeking systemic social change. And on the Cape, now these certainly aren't all of them, but there was the Florence Tea Room at Silver Beach in Falmouth, the Magansett, thank you, Tea Room in North Falmouth, the Gray Shingle Tea Room in Barnstable, and the Windmill Tea Room at Englewood Beach in South Yarmouth. And this is the Dunbar Tea Room in Sandwich. And this was built, Mr. Dunbar, he was actually overseeing the building of the canal. And they bought the house and restored it and added a billiard room and a garden. And so his wife said, well, no, I don't know anything to do with it. It's a beautiful house, beautiful garden. And that was how the Dunbar Tea Room started. And there's plenty of entertainment here. Even though we only had a population of 14,000 people, the Idle Hour in Hyannis, that opened in 1911 on Main Street in Hyannis, and they actually had air conditioning in 1926, which was amazing. I don't know if there was somebody up there with big ice cubes. But it was pretty popular. And the beautiful Chatham Orpheum Theater. Has anybody been to that in the last couple of years?
Oh, yeah.
It is beautiful. They opened in 1916 and they're still operating. The Elizabeth Theater in Falmouth opened in 1920 in the center of Falmouth. And I think there was I don't know if there was something before that, the Empire Theater in Falmouth. That I don't think it lasted long. I think it burnt down or something.
Is there a street address on the Idle Hour?
On the what? On the Idle Hour?
Yeah,
Idle Hour, 1911.
Yeah, she's looking for an address. I don't know, if you Googled it, you could probably get the address. And the Buzzards Bay Theater was actually originally a garage opened in the 1920s. And of course, as we all know, this became a mecca for artists. In 1899, Charles Hawthorne opened the Cape Cod School of Art, and he taught the Impressionists en plein air, which was outdoor style on the beach. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? So the artists started flocking to Cape Cod, and part of the reason was the amazing light. Also, artists were fleeing Europe during World War One and coming to Provincetown, and it was excuse me, it was the first of several art schools that were established over the next years that promoted Provincetown as an art colony. So the performing arts. So in Provincetown around 1920, you have the Provincetown Players, and this is a time when Eugene O'Neill put on his first production. And it wasn't until I think 1961 that Provincetown actually had their own, Provincetown Players actually had their own theater. I don't know if you can recognize the Barnstable Comedy Club, which was, I think it was called the Old Village Hall, but it officially became their home in 1922. And then, of course, you had the university players, in Falmouth, which they used to play at the, Elizabeth Theater in, the Elizabeth Theater. Yes, the Elizabeth Theater in Falmouth. And then in 1931, a theater just for the university players opened. And you had really famous names. You can maybe fill us in, Sharon, Jimmy Stewart, James Cagney, Henry Fonda, all those big stars of the day, would come here. And of course, the crown jewel, the Cape Playhouse, which opened in 1927, with a production of The Guardsman that starred Basil Rathbone and Violet Kendall Cooper. It is the longest operating summer theater in the country. Yeah. And the cinema opened in 1930, and it was the first theater to preview The Wizard of Oz before its Hollywood premiere. It's pretty amazing. So, nightlife. I was really surprised. Yeah, there's the Blue Moon and Buzzard. Now, these were strictly, for nightlife. The Blue Moon on Buzzards Bay, the Bourne Hearse on the canal by Buzzards Bay, the Atlantic House in Provincetown, and this, I love this, the Rainbow Ballroom and Rollodrome in West Yarmouth. And West Yarmouth really became, Route 28, was really a hotbed of entertainment, even back then. And then the Mill Hill Dancing Pavilion in West Yarmouth too, which is pretty amazing. So I'm gonna pass this over to our flapper. And Sharon's gonna talk about how this became a rum runner paradise.
I get the best part. Actually, this is the shade out of the Cape. And most of what I'm gonna talk about, oh, beg your pardon, sorry.
That's better.
Most of what I'm gonna talk about is already on my podcast. I think I have 78 episodes. And it's all about rum runners and what was going on the Cape at that time. And I already showed you what it's Cape Cod 1929 is the title of the podcast. Rum runners. Oh my goodness, we had rum runners everywhere. When Prohibition became the law of the land, the making of bootlegging and rum running business was very lucrative. 1920 to 1933, which is Prohibition. This section of the East Coast was used extensively. Cape was ideal because of many seaports, harbors, bays, rivers, and beaches. But during Prohibition, the U.S. Coast Guard, bless the little hearts, used destroyers to enforce Prohibition laws and break the link between motherships and the smaller contact boats that ran liquor onto the shore. On the slide, you see those are Cape Cod, I would call them cutters, but those are definitely the Cape Cod boats that tried to keep the peace and enforce the law. They weren't always successful. And one of my podcasts, I know I had done so many from the point of view of the rum runner, but I had never done anything from the point of view of the Coast Guard and how hard they worked to stop this. And it wasn't easy. Let me put it that way. Now, there's a story about a glass bottom boat. When the shipment of liquor came in, most of them were wrapped in burlap, like burlap sacks, and dropped into the water. And so the fishing boats would go with their grappling hooks and hook the burlap sacks and bring them on to the boat. But they didn't always get all of them. and some of them stayed on the bottom of the water. So one entrepreneurial seaman thought so that he could see the sacks better. He cut the bottom out of his boat and put in a glass bottom. And he put it up on shore and he left it there. And he waited for the next time that they had a drop. So he went and to get his boat. And when he got there, the bottom was smashed. The Coast Guard had found out, and they stopped him by crashing the bottom of his boat. So I know, but it was a good attempt. What you see up there on the pink slip, believe it or not, is a legitimate prescription for someone who absolutely needed whiskey. And that prescription, I found it online. If you read it carefully, it was issued in New Bedford. The address is right on there, and the pharmacy, and it was strictly for medicinal purposes, but it was officially issued by the National Prohibition Act, and it says it right on the prescription. Yep, there were a lot of speakeasies and gin joints all up and down the Cape, like One-Eyed Minnie's and One-Legged Charlie's. Those were both in Mashpee. I also have a writer in my writing group who was pretty sure that his house was once a speak, because he keeps finding, when I guess he's excavating the basement, and he keeps finding all kinds of bottles and glasses. But we're not sure, but and if you couldn't find a speakeasy, you could usually find someone brewing beer or bathtub gin. And I'm going to give you an idea. Now, when I first started these podcasts, I had no idea that rum runners were one thing and bootleggers were something else. A rum runner is usually the boats that went out and got the liquor and brought it to shore. The bootleggers made gin in their own homes. So there is a big difference, but they both had the same goal in mind, I think. Anybody here? No, anybody that made bathtub gin? No? Well, I guess I wouldn't ask you to admit it. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, the Casa Madrid in Yarmouth opened at the tail end of Prohibition in 1933. It held 300 people. The building still stands on Rum Pond Road, and they serve mostly the good stuff. And it's said there was gambling in the back rooms. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was. But in reality, there was a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod, and payoffs going on everywhere. And one podcast that I did talks about Governor Curley. I think he was governor at that time. If he wasn't, he was mayor. Was visiting the Casa Madrid, and he had 2 bodyguards behind him, and the place got raided, and they threw him out the window so that they could get him out of there so he wouldn't get caught. Are there any questions? No? Bless your hearts. Okay, now this is called the Bootleggers Aviators. The bootleggers didn't really fly, but airplanes were used to warn the rum runners of the ships. They would fly out when they thought they heard, when they thought they heard about a ship coming in. They would fly out and patrol over the Cape to see if the ships were out there, and, you know, because they had to be the 12-mile limit. And it was easier for an airplane to see if there were any ships out there. So the airplanes were also used to transport some liquor. And the biggest attraction, oh, this is where the Zenas Crocker comes in. The biggest attraction was the Aviation Country Club near Cape Cod Airfield. And they had an open bar and a nightclub 7 nights a week. Now, it was run by Zenas Crocker's brother. And Zenas Crocker was the sheriff. And he raided the place and he closed it down. And it eventually ended up at the Elks Club in Hyannis. Okay, rummies. Oh, an interview. Now, this is kind of interesting. Joseph Yucca of the Cape Cod Military Museum. I asked him a question if he knew something about Charles Robertson Ailing's demise. And he came up with this interview that he had done with a gentleman named William Elliott Anderson. And he lived right in Centerville. And he tells the story of his Uncle Bob, who had a 40-foot rum runner with twin Liberty engines that were government surplus airplane engines. Now, he put 2 of those on the back of his boat. Yeah, I'm wondering why it wasn't airborne. He also, once he picked up his cargo, he took his boat up the river to a path that led to his barn. He had a secret compartment in the back of his garage and a trap door under his manure pile to hide the booze. Talk about being creative, huh? Now, I'm going to go back to my, most of my research was done to find podcasts. So I was really concerned. I had no idea how this happened, how the rum runners found out, how they set up, yeah, I'm looking for a word. I'll find it. How they set up a drop. So I think what happened is I put all the pieces together. I think what happened is someone went to Boston and the Cunard line, C-U-N-A-R-D line, and paid money and ordered a drop of liquor on probably the next boat coming down from Halifax. So when that boat came down, again, I'm going to go for the Cunard line because that's where I did my research. They would wait at the 12-mile limit and drop. So now our seamen, our sailors, picked up the drop and then took it to shore. But when they got it to shore, they had to put it somewhere. So they got it on, actually the Nash Rambler Roadster was the car of the day because it had a huge big rumble seat and you could put lots of booze in there. So, and that's how they got it to the different destinations. Now, Don Wilding wrote a great piece about the Cape Cod rum runners and Cape Cod life. These pictures just depict some highlights. You want to read it for me, Dorothy? Or do you want to wait until I'm done?
Read what?
Do we have that rum runners up on the screen?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. Another rummy, Prescott Bud Cummings from Eastham, was a very successful rum runner. He got $5 for every case and estimated he made $200,000 for the 40,000 cases he brought in. And it's equivalent to about $3 million today. So was it lucrative? But it was not all fun and games. It was not unusual to find bullet-ridden vehicles dumped on the Rummies farms. So it wasn't all fun and games. Okay. Sorry. Two brothers, two paths. Alfred Anderson flew an OX-5 airplane for the Coast Guard during Prohibition. And they used to go out, remember I said, looking for drops. And his brother John Anderson flew the same type plane for rum runners. And he had also been a mechanic for Amelia Earhart when she came on base. So from that same interview, we learned about the brothers. While working in Chatham, John Anderson, I think it was John, on an old fabric airplane, John rigged an airplane's elevator cables incorrectly. Luckily, Frenchie, the pilot, figured out what had happened, and he was able to land the plane. And then the fight broke out. Frenchie proceeded to pound the crap out of John. It's always interesting when two people from the same family follow such divergent paths. Think Whitey and Billy Bulger. Whitey was a convicted mob boss, while Billy went the straight and narrow. His 18-year tenure as president of the Massachusetts Senate is the longest in history, or Cain and Abel. Are we on the last slide? Now, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is best to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. And that's a famous quote from Charles Darwin, which Dorothy and I both felt.
It's not really from Charles Darwin, because it's a misnomer. It is from this Professor Menkenson, who paraphrased Darwin's origin, evolution. Yeah.
Good thought, thank you. Almost did a misnomer. Okay, but looking back on our history, how might this apply to Cape Cod? What do you think? Cape Cod has the most adaptable people I have ever met. They're problem solvers, they're entrepreneurs, they're incredible. So, what do you think? Questions, comments? No?
You know it. Good. I'm a Dorothy. I'm not a walking tour by any means. My grandfather